When you think of a drill sergeant, you obviously think of the military. Now, about 5 years into my teaching career, I landed up getting a promotion post at a very big technical college in Kempton Park. Now, back then in those days, you didn't really get a promotion in the technical college system when you were 30 years of age. You were viewed as being on the young side, especially if your department had a lot of Omana, experienced men. But it so happened that I managed to get this position. It was, the formal position was Senior Lecturer of Mathematics and Engineering Science. But my immediate boss was the head of the Engineering Studies department, and we'll refer to him as Long Pitt. He was 6'8.5" tall, and he was a mountain of a man. He wasn't necessarily that wide, but what he lacked in width, he made up in altitude and attitude. He had been a sergeant in the Air Force, and he was a technical man. He had also been he worked on the aircraft, and then eventually landed up not flying aircraft, but being in the cockpit as a flight engineer in the Air Force planes, not in the fighter planes, but more sort of in the cargo planes and also the troop carriers. So when I say troop carriers, the planes where they would fly troops. So he was a military man. And when I sat in the interview, I could read by his body language, he just didn't like me. But the principal of the school was very different, and of the college. And he took a liking to me, and I got employed. And literally within the first 2 or 3 days, Long Pitt said to me, "You weren't my choice. So I'm just letting you know." So that made me feel very welcome. Not. And it didn't take too long for me to get under his skin. It wasn't easy for me as a young teacher. I was still young. I was about maybe 6 or 7 years into my teaching career. I think it was a little bit over 5. I think it was more on the 6, 7 years. Not that that's important. But he was a drill sergeant, and his approach was not easy for a lot of the staff under him, because he would check up on us, and he would make sure in the mornings, first lesson, he would come and collect the registers. And he was tall enough to be able to walk past your class and actually peer in through the top windows to actually see into your class without you realizing that he was looking in. There were a few times where I was talking to the students, and then I saw them look up like this, and there was his face looking in. You were under surveillance. And I've got to be honest with you, I didn't like him. So he also refused to give me the senior mathematics, which, strictly speaking, I was supposed to teach. He gave it to one of the maths lecturers in my department. He was a lecturer and I was a senior lecturer, but he got the N5 and N6, and I was lucky to get N4, which also didn't endear me to him. And he just said, "No, this gentleman's more experienced than you. Sorry, wait your turn for the next 10 years. So things didn't look good. And it got to a point where one day things were really bad, and he screamed at me. And I listened, I didn't say anything, and then I walked out. And then when things had calmed down, I went to him and I said to him, I was always trying to be respectful. I called him Wimpit. I said, "Wimpit, it's quite obvious that you don't like me, you don't agree with the way I teach, but I want to learn from you. What am I doing wrong? Well, I think this man was completely taken by surprise. I remember him behind his desk leaning back like this, and he was shocked. And then he leaned forward and in a very objective way said to me, "You sit too much at your desk. You're stealing teaching time from your students. You should be walking between them and asking them questions." He said, "You don't prepare well enough." I thought, now how does he know that? I thought I prepared well. I'd prepare a few examples. I got the sense of it, and then, I would teach. And there were a few other things. And it was amazing, from that day on, there was a turnaround. And I think there's a life lesson in that, and I was taught this by my father, that lessons that can be learned and should be learned don't always come from people you like or who like you. You can still learn from people who don't like you and who you don't like. But things changed, and from that time on we actually got along a lot better. And then I got to see how he taught, and then things started to make sense. Every problem that he covered in his lessons, he had actually prepped and he had solved. And he never sat down in his classes. He always walked between the students. Now, today, obviously, things are different. Now, we have platforms like GoFormative, and we have internet-based platforms where we can deliver, Google Classroom, deliver content, and it enables us to have a less teacher-focused approach and a more learner-focused approach. But in that context, with those type of students, the technical students at that stage that were in our college, they actually needed that. And he was big on practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect. And he really drilled his students. And while the context where many of us teach nowadays doesn't warrant that, he was relevant in that context. And so that discipline, that toughness, because a lot of the students we taught were really, really tough, was relevant there. And so Long Pitt taught me a thing or two about the importance of discipline in the class, the importance of preparing properly, the importance of being engaged with your students from the start to the finish, and not stealing time, teaching time, by being maybe lazy. And I worked with him for 5 years, and in those 5 years, it was a very tough 5 years. But I've got to say, looking back after 2 decades, I'm glad that I had the opportunity to learn under him. And the lessons were not always easy. The lessons were not always sugar-coated, but they did make me a better teacher. And in my own teaching style, I believe that there is a time where one has to change gear and where one has to direct students almost like a drill sergeant in preparing for an exam, like you prepare for a rugby match or a soccer match, like a good coach will do. But obviously, there's always a balance. So I'm forever thankful to the drill sergeant for having taught me the lessons that I needed to learn at that stage in my teaching career. So thank you, Long Pitt. Thank you for contributing to my teaching style.